Well, it's good to be back with you for another week of Bible study as we are continuing on here in our journey through the book. My name is Kevin Young, and I have the privilege of serving at Christ Table as lead clergy. If you'd like to find out more about Christ Table, would encourage you to visit the URL that is right up there in the corner of the screen, www.christstable.today. There, I want to encourage you to sign up for the email list there. We send an email every week or two just to let you know of all of the things that are happening at Christ Table. And this is a ministry that is dedicated towards people who are on the margins, on the fringes, evangelicals, people who are disillusioned, disappointed, or done with the church, but still want to have spiritual connections and community. We also end up being a discipleship resource for a lot of people who need one in their current faith communities. And we appreciate you all who are a part of this as well. If you'd like to be a part of finding out more about this study in particular, that URL that is right there in front of me, go.christstable.today/thebook will give you a resource of all of the study days here that you can download a PDF absolutely free. Also, there's a study guide to help you travel along with us each and every day. And if you would like a printed bound version of that, you can get that there as well. Just click on the button that says get the box, and we will send you a box of a ton of spiritual resources and materials that go along with this study to help you navigate your way through. Now, this week we find ourselves looking into the wisdom literature, which is going to put us here in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 3 through 14 today in our text. And we've been looking at different parts and sections of the Bible to kind of understand how they are unique and how they are different and how we can understand them in the grander scheme of the Bible, but also how we can see them a bit sometimes as outsiders from them, and hopefully in a fresh new way. Now, the wisdom literature in particular is a section of the Hebrew scriptures that includes Job, Psalm, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. These mostly are written by David and Solomon, though they are not the only writers in the wisdom literature. Now, we're going to find ourselves today in 1 Kings chapter 3 to kind of learn a little bit more about these primary authors in the wisdom literature. And David and Solomon are going to be our primary subjects today. So why don't we just go ahead and jump into this text. For some of you, this story will be a little bit familiar, and for others of you, perhaps not. So Solomon loved the Lord and followed all of the decrees of his father David, except that Solomon too offered sacrifices and burned incense at the local places of worship. So Solomon is the son of David, and clearly according to this verse, was not perfect. And if you know anything about King David was not perfect either. The text said that he was a man after God's own heart, but also David did some really terrible and awful things. As a parent, was not a great parent. Really, probably if you were going to choose somebody to be like in Scripture, you might want to be king and have the relationship with God that David had, and have the applause of all of the people like David did and still does. But in the grand scheme of things, David wasn't always really a great person. And if you're going to model your life after someone, David might not be the person that I would suggest you choosing. And oftentimes heroes of groups of people are not often that way. You know, you find that, right? You go to this big church and the pastor is a hero and you love the pastor, and then you get to know the pastor and you don't really want to go to that church anymore. You get this job, you love the CEO or you love the supervisor, you love the face of this, and then you kind of get to know the person behind the scenes and hear the stories, and you're like, I don't know that I want to support this company. Presidents, politicians, professors, supervisors, pastors, kings, people who are even said to have been men after God's own heart. King David and King Solomon, two of the greatest kings of Israel. The most important of these places of worship that Solomon utilized was at Gibeon, so the king went there and sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings. So he was He was intense about his faith. And if you were to read 1 Kings chapter 1 and 1 Kings chapter 2 that come right before this, you might say, I'm not sure that I recognize this guy. That night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream and said, what do you want? Ask and I will give it to you. And this kind of gives me, genie in the bottle vibes. It gives me Aladdin vibes, Don't mess up. Don't make the wrong request here. And Solomon has a choice in this dream. Solomon replies, you showed great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he was honest and true and faithful to you. So David obeyed and David honored you. David fulfilled the covenant. And we've talked about this a little bit more in prior Bible studies during this journey through the book. But at the end of the day, what David did well was maintain the covenant on behalf of the people, the agreement with God. You do this, God says, and I will give you blessings. And if you don't do these things, then you're not going to receive those blessings. That was the agreement. So David did those things well. Psalmist says, and you've continued to show this great and faithful love to David today by giving him a son, meaning me, to sit on his throne. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am like a little child who doesn't know his way around. I can't possibly fill daddy's shoes. I can't possibly fill the great King David's shoes. And here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous that they can't be counted. Give me an understanding heart. Give me an ability to do justice well so that I can govern the people well and know the difference between right and wrong. One of the primary things that kings had to do was make decisions, justice decisions, as to what was right and what was wrong, whether to go left, whether to go right. Think of it in a lot of ways as being a judge. That was a large part of the responsibility for a king during these ancient times. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours? I can't do this alone. And the text tells us in verse 10 that the Lord was pleased that Solomon essentially here asked for wisdom. So God replies, because you have asked for wisdom and governing my people with justice and have not asked for the things that most people would ask for if they were given one wish, right? A long life or a whole lot of money or the death of your enemies. Hey, that was hard to pass up, right? I'm going to give you what you asked for. I'm going to give you wisdom. I'll give you a wise and an understanding heart, such as no one else has had or ever will have. And I will also give you what you did not ask for. I'm going to give you riches and fame. Another king in the world will be compared to you for the rest of your life. And history tells us that that was true of Solomon. And if you follow me and obey my decrees and my commands as your father David did, then I will give you a long life. So Solomon makes a decision that is not selfish, but is selfless, and in return receives those things that a selfish person would have asked for. And we could probably stop there and that be enough for us to understand and to dwell on the difference between being selfless or selfish whenever given the opportunity. A lot of people have written about this passage, and this is a tough passage because the question is, did this really happen? And there are people on both sides of this argument, really smart people on both sides of this argument. And some will say, well, but it's a little embellished. It's intended to help explain and understand how Solomon's reign was so blessed and how Solomon was so blessed and how he was so wise. Wherever you fall on that, I think is okay. I tend to fall on the side of there is something to this, some sort of an agreement or an understanding between Solomon and God. The things, though, that are fascinating to me in this passage are a couple of things. I love that whenever God asks Solomon, what can I do for you? I understand the situation, the predicament that you're in, so how can I help? I love that what Solomon says here is that he asks for a listening heart. This kind of complex phrase in the Hebrew text can also mean an obedient heart. But I love the idea that it is translated here as being not just discerning, not just obedient. I think the translation said a discerning heart in the New Living Translation, and not just obedient, but a listening heart. That implies listening to God, being sensitive, not being closed-minded or having your ears plugged. But I think that it also implies, rightly so, an ability to listen to the people and the community and the world around you. And I think that we see this kind of play out in Solomon. If you read through the wisdom literature, Ecclesiastes, which Solomon is said to have written, Song of Solomon, which is, or Song of Songs, depending on which version of the Bible you're reading, is also attributed to Solomon. I think that you see this supernatural ability to be wet clay, to listen. And I find that so much justice and wealth comes from the ability truly to listen to others. A listening heart. But there's one other thing that I just want to point out, and you probably have kind of recognized this in the text as you're working through the questions in today's study, is our requests reveal what sort of persons we are. And we kind of know this intuitively, I think. Another way that I heard saying this was, your checkbook kind of tells you what you prioritize. Well, the things that you request reveal what sort of persons we are. If you're a person of prayer, your prayer lists reveal kind of what you care about, what sort of person you are, right? How much of it is things for you, how much of it is things for other people, and what those things are. But also, I think, the idea that God might show up and say, you can have anything that you want, as though he were a genie in a bottle to grant you something. Your response to that would reveal what kind of person you are. And I think that most of us would probably say that we would probably be magnanimous in some way, even if we were asking for wealth or money, even if we were asking for something that seemed to be for us, then we would intend to use that for other people. But would we? Now, tithing is a whole separate can of worms, but I heard somebody use the illustration one time that, people will say, let me win the lottery, God, and I will tithe. I'll give all that money, or I'll give 10%, to the church or to people who are in need. But on the money that they have right now, they don't help people out who are in need or use their resources to do that. And so, I do think that there is some sort of truth to the fact that the people who we are in the small ways and in the small places and in the little things are the people who we would end up being in the big things. We are who we are, no matter how many resources we have or how resource limited we are. That doesn't mean that you can do everything that you want to do on a tight or limited budget. But at the end of the day, I think that the point is well made, that the sort of person that we would be in another situation is the sort of person who we would be now. Solomon clearly was the sort of person who was unique, in some ways selfless, and was willing to make sacrifice for other people. And when given the opportunity to have something more for himself, he chooses something in order to help other people. I wish that there were more people in the world who understood the wealth that comes and a heart that listens to others. That, from where I sit, is true wisdom. Until tomorrow.